You know, box office revenue news can always seem kind of gloomy, but what if I told you people are flocking to theaters, just not the ones playing movies? On today's podcast, how the Stratford Festival in particular is drawing big audiences. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. This is Commotion. So if you're not familiar, the Stratford Festival is a theatre festival that is at the heart of Canada's theatre scene. Some of our biggest stage actors have got their start there, and people actually come from all over the world to see its plays. It's also kind of notable for some of its offstage stuff. There are traditions and small town quirks. And while a lot of theatre companies around the country are struggling, Stratford is not. In fact, it brings in more than twice as much box office revenue as the entire English language film industry in Canada. That is kind of a staggering statistic, more than double. So what are they getting right? Aisling Murphy is a theatre critic who's been checking out some of this year's offerings, and she's going to talk me through the secret to their success. Aisling, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. Let's talk about Stratford, because I myself have never been. And so for other people like me, what is happening at this festival? What's the vibe?
The vibe is like nothing I've ever seen before in Canadian theatre. So when the Stratford Festival opens every year, folks in the theatre industry tend to call it theatre prom. You're seeing lots of people in very fancy dresses, fancy suits, and so much fanfare for these shows that are opening and kicking off the festival. So this year, those opening shows, we had 3 plays by Shakespeare. So Twelfth Night, Romeo and Juliet, and Cymbeline. We had a new adaptation of Hedda Gabler by Henrik Ibsen, and then the 2 musicals for the season, which are Something Rotten and La Cage aux Folles. Okay,
so that's what you've seen. That's kind of what you're excited about. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, across the country, as I kind of mentioned, there are a lot of theaters struggling to bring people in, struggling to sort of make that box office revenue. But why is it so different at Stratford? I mean, you mentioned the pomp and circumstance, the fancy outfits, but what else is going on? What are they doing that is continuing to attract audiences?
Yeah, I mean, when you go to Stratford, you're really not just there for the theater, in my experience. You know, if you're like me and you're visiting from Toronto, it can really be an escape in terms of being in this kind of quirky small town atmosphere. You know, there's like a bakery on every corner. It's very quiet. You know, you're really there to kind of soak up that small town charm. And then at night, you get to see some of the best theater that Canada has to offer in a lot of ways. It's a pretty singular environment in my experience.
I love that it's baked goods. That is really the secret. Just
those are so important.
Put a bakery in every theater is what it sounds like you're saying. But how much of a factor are the actual programming decisions? You mentioned some of the plays you were excited about. I heard a lot of Shakespeare in there. Is this mix of plays kind of contributing to that success?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, for me, I'm not the biggest Shakespeare person. I know that I'm supposed to be as a theater critic, but what I look forward to every year is the musicals, because they tend to be just supremely well directed and choreographed. A lot of the times it's all about the spectacle. And I'd say that this year is no different for that.
I want to go back to what I sort of said off the top, that there's more than double the box office revenue when it comes to Stratford, and that's compared to the English language film revenue, which sounds impossible to me, you know, given how few people I know are going to the theater these days. How is that even possible, Aisling?
Yeah, I mean, again, like the experience that you're getting at Stratford really isn't like anything that you're going to get elsewhere. So for instance, their kind of big musical this season is Something Rotten, which is larger than life, completely wild. All of it is predicated on a really bad pun where a playwright in the Elizabethan era wants to compete with Shakespeare. So ultimately there's kind of like a broken telephone sort of situation. And in order to compete with Shakespeare, he winds up writing a musical called Omelette instead of Hamlet.
And you're wearing that. Yeah, you've got an omelet T-shirt just for everyone.
You have to. The merch is everything. But ultimately in this musical, there winds up being like a 10-minute dance break for tap dancing eggs. And like I say that out loud and I feel like it's a fever dream. It's again, just larger than life, irreverent. You're seeing some of the best costumes that Canadian theatre has to offer. And then particularly with Something Rotten this year, that show marks the return of Donna Fior, who has directed and choreographed countless shows at Stratford. It's really exciting to have her back this year. And Something Rotten, I mean, there were 2 standing ovations mid-show when I went for opening night, and that doesn't really happen ever. So it's so exciting to see theater like that done really well, and also to see audiences reacting so positively to it, because it really is one of its kind, I think.
Well, it's one of its kind, but what can other theater companies take from this? Because you want to hope that the excitement for something like this does eventually sort of make its way across the country.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, from a programming perspective, there really is something for everyone at the Stratford Festival. I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but I do find that it's actually true at Stratford. So if you're kind of like a Shakespeare purist, you have very traditionally staged Shakespeare productions like Romeo and Juliet this year. If you want to see, men in tights, women in beautiful costumes, you'll go to Romeo and Juliet and you'll get that experience. If you want a musical like me, you have options for that. If you're interested in new play development, like Canadian new plays, the Stratford Festival also does that really well. And there will be new plays opening at the end of the summer that I'm really excited about. Ultimately, I find that Stratford is great about programming both what people know they want to see and then maybe what they might want to take a bit of a risk with. So there really is something for every type of audience member. And no matter what, if you go to Stratford, you can probably find something that you enjoy. And maybe that's not the case at every theater company. Like, I think it definitely speaks to a diversity of programming and how that can be really helpful for ticket sales and engaging new audiences.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. You mentioned a great point there. For people listening, I'm Emil Niazi. I'm sitting in for Elamine Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. And I'm chatting with theater critic Aisling Murphy about the summer theater. And right now we're going to get into a few recommendations. There's 12 plays running this year at Stratford. You've brought up a few things that you've been excited about. But for someone who's listening to this and goes, okay, I'm going to make my way to all the bakeries, what should they go and see?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to note that I've only seen 6 of the openings so far, because every year Stratford staggers their openings. So there are things slated for later in the summer that I'm super excited about and also haven't seen, but I am pretty sure that they'll be amazing. For me, one of those is Get That Hope. This is a modern adaptation of Long Day's Journey into Night. It's set in Toronto's Little Jamaica neighborhood. It's by the playwright Andrea Scott, who, she's proven herself over and over again, and all signs point to this show being amazing. So I'm so excited for that opening later in the summer. As I said before, both of the musicals this year are incredibly strong. So if you want a really big musical, Something Rotten is the way to go. If you want something maybe in a bit of a smaller space, but still dazzling in terms of its costumes and sets, La Cage aux Folles you can't go wrong with that.
And tell us a bit more about La Cage aux Folles.
Yeah, absolutely. So, drag queens. It's essentially it's about the drag community in a lot of ways, and it's sort of a love letter to queer love and queer relationships through the years. Mm-hmm. I don't want to spoil the story too much, because it's just incredibly touching and heartwarming and really worth discovering on your own. But especially for Pride Month, I found it to be an incredibly appropriate piece of programming. And again, just the costumes are like nothing you've ever seen before. They're stunning. That
sounds amazing. And you talked about Shakespeare and, sort of this festival being synonymous with him. Is there one play you might recommend for people who are curious about Shakespeare, but, don't necessarily have the best history with him, perhaps in high school? Not naming names.
Totally. Absolutely. No, so 12th Night I was really impressed with this year. That was the very first opening of the week for opening week this year, and I was really impressed. I'm not a huge Shakespeare person, but I found that director Shauna McKenna really created a world that I could both understand and find the humor in, which was great. And just the cast is superb as well. I mean, Laura Condlin plays Malvolio, and there's a very silly subplot in terms of tricking Malvolio into wearing some kind of ugly stockings. And it wound up just being kind of like a laugh out loud riot of a production. I really, really enjoyed it.
I love that. Okay, Aisling, yes, Stratford is great, but we also want people to be able to check out theater where they are from. So let's go across the country a little bit. If you are going to see some theater and you want to recommend some things, what's your first stop in Canada?
Absolutely. So I would first actually head to Gander, Newfoundland.
Surprising.
Yeah, maybe not what folks would expect. But if you know anything about Canadian musical theater, you'll know that Gander has kind of an important place in the canon as the kind of birthplace of Come From Away. Mm-hmm. So this has now happened for a few years now, where they'll do a production of Come From Away in Gander, which is just so incredibly special to be able to witness that story unfurl in this tiny small town on the East Coast. I've now been to Newfoundland to see Come From Away twice, and every time it's been a transformative experience. Like, you're really getting to interact not only with the show at that point, but with the community that built it as well. It's an incredibly special experience that anyone who can, I think, should do. Oh,
that's so nice. You're really convincing me on everything here. Okay, what about Quebec? We'll move through these quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a show opening in Montreal in the next couple of weeks called The Great Divide. And this will be at the Segal Center in Montreal. We actually had this in Toronto in 2022 at the Harold Green Jewish Theatre Company. It's a really kind of haunting and touching play about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in the early 20th century in New York. I found it to be written very, very well. And it's really uncovering maybe a hidden part of history in a way I found super effective. So highly recommend for anyone in the Montreal area.
Such a good, important part of history. Not a good part, an important part of history. Okay, totally. Take us to the prairies now.
Yeah, 100%. So Edmonton Fringe is the largest and longest running fringe in North America, which I find so cool. Like, Edmonton seems like kind of a random spot for that to have happened, but it's also a huge big deal. And the fringe circuit in Canada generally is a great way for folks to maybe experiment with some theater that they wouldn't have thought to see on their own before. But Edmonton in particular is a great spot for that.
I love that. Okay, and then let's go to the north before we wrap up.
Yeah, 100%. So Nakai Theatre Company in Yukon, they do these puppet parades every summer for continuing care homes and other different community outreach markets and things. I find that they've really integrated puppetry into a lot of their community outreach, which is really cool. The photos look amazing, and I've wanted to check it out for years. So I hope that people have the chance to.
Aisling, thank you so much. That was just such a fun journey into the theater world.
Thank you.
Aisling Murphy is a regular here on Commotion. She is a theater critic, and you can read her deep dive on the Stratford Festival on the CBC Arts page.
Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar, dollar bill, yo. Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar, dollar bill, yo.
It's been 22 long, hard years. I'm still struggling. Survival got me bugging, but I'm alive on arrival.
I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamine Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. What you're hearing right now is a bit of Cream by the legendary hip-hop collective Wu-Tang Clan. Wu-Tang has been in the news recently, and it's all to do with an album they made 10 years ago in secrecy and reportedly sold for millions of dollars. It's called Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. And here's the thing, there's only one physical copy. Very few people have ever heard it, and it is mired in legal controversy. The general public apparently won't hear it until 2103, about 79 years from now, so I'll probably never hear it. But this week, a little twist. The art collective who owns it now has been offering fans a chance to gain access. Jay Connor is here to talk about all the hype surrounding this album and some of the questions it's been raising about how we value physical art. Hey, Jay, welcome back to Commotion.
What up?
Okay, so people this past weekend had a chance to listen to a little bit of the album. Tell us about what happened there.
Well, this weekend, over in Tanzania, because all things cool come from Australia. You got Crocodile Dundee, you got koala bears, and also you got the most expensive album ever sold, which is currently, displayed at
Tasmania. Yeah.
Tasmania's Museum of Old and New Art as part of their name dropping exhibit, which explores quote unquote status, notoriety, celebrity, scarcity, but it's only available for 10 days. And they are playing it for the public via a 30-minute mix that's curated by Silver Rings.
And is it free to go there? Like, are they just able to walk in and listen to it?
At this point, no, it's sold out. The wait list is about 5,000 people. You might have missed your blessing. You might have to wait another 88 years to check out, check it out in 2103. But to your point, also, the group that purchased it, Pleaser, now, they have dollar, I don't want to say like dollar samples available, like when you go to the grocery store or something like that. But they do have 5-minute snippets that you can listen to for $1 currently.
Oh, okay. $1 is a pretty good deal these days, actually. So the physical album, reportedly sold for millions. And I felt this way when it was sold, like this possibly, can't possibly look like your normal record. I'm sure it's got like embossed in gold. It's got diamonds on it somehow. What does the actual copy, and there's only one copy of it, look like? Do you know?
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. When I first heard about it, I thought, it would look like Ghostface Killer's, like that big falcon he has on his arm.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to have something like that on it. But honestly, it looks kind of like, remember those tins that your grandma used to have that you keep cookies in?
Yes.
It looks kind of like that, but just a little bit more flashy. So, when it dropped, when it first went on sale in 2015, RZA, who, is the head of the whole Wu-Tang conglomerate, he actually compared it to like a Picasso or an ancient Egyptian artifact. But looking at it, it's actually, a hand-carved nickel silver box. And when you open it, it's got 2 CDs in it. And it also comes with like a leather-bound 174-page manuscript with the lyrics from the album, and as well as that certificate of authenticity that prevents it being available to the public for another 88 years.
Oh, interesting. I mean, the cookie tin thing is a little disheartening. I also thought it was going to look a lot flashier. So
right.
When this album was first announced 10 years ago, like you mentioned, Wu-Tang's founder and producer RZA and Silver Rings said it was created to protest the devaluation of music in the digital era. I mean, since then, things have changed even more in terms of that idea. Can you elaborate a bit on this and kind of what they were thinking when they produced this?
As far as the album creation, it's not exactly a secret that many artists aren't exactly enthused with having, their music on streaming. I think Mos Def is probably one of the most prominent people in that regard as far as being a vocal critic of it. But with that in mind, RZA and Silver Rings made it a point that they wanted to create music that would be revered and respected for what music often is not treated as, which is art, especially in this day and age with, things being so disposable and stuff like that. But one of the reasons that there's only, just one copy of the album is there's intrinsic value and novelty. We know that, the more people have access to something, the less value there can be drawn from it. There's a reason there's only one NBA champion every season. There's a reason there's only one Jay Connor. And there's a reason, Once Upon a Time in Shaolin initially sold for $2 million because there's only one and because there's that allure and that draw to it. And especially because of, that Wu-Tang mystique.
But I wonder, because of the scarcity, because it has been so sort of bogged down in all this like legal stuff, has it actually changed the conversation around, how we value physical art, or was this just a little bit of a blip as far as the conversation goes?
I think that's a great question to ask because, we live in a day and age with streaming where we're essentially renting music. None of us own music anymore. We don't, unless you go to iTunes and purchase it. we essentially all are renting music like we're going to Blockbuster Video and getting it for the weekend. But as far as like, what this says about the value of music, I think that it kind of served as a catalyst for other artists to do similar things, not necessarily at that price point. But I mean, Black Star returned with their album that was only available on Luminary. And we've seen other examples of artists selling their music only and not making it available for streaming, whether they're bigger name artists or, somebody super underground like Young Z, you know what I mean? So, I think that it's definitely inspired people to be more creative and be more direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Because, a lot of times, recently with Duran Bernard, his new single Unknown was only available for purchase ahead of time until it was available to streaming. So I think in some ways it's being seen as a way to reward your most ardent fans.
Mm. I mean, I wonder, you said it was reportedly sold for $2 million. Could it have made more money if they just released it the old fashioned way?
You mean it collectively? Like in total sales? I think so. I mean, let's not act like Wu-Tang hasn't sold millions of copies, but I mean, also, through record labels, clearly they didn't see necessarily the fruits of those labor. But I mean, if they would have sold it directly, I guess you could make that argument, but you could also make the argument that they did and got 2 million. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think that, if they could have sold it for a lot more, possibly. But I mean, I think they were more than happy to sell an album for $2 million. And there's a reason it's the most expensive piece of music ever sold. So clearly they did something right.
Yes, very true. Very good point.
I mean, the album has been through a lot, right? It first sold to pharmaceutical executive Martin Shkreli, one of the most hated men for a while, and this didn't help. And he was forced to sell it because he was convicted on fraud charges. And now he's being sued by the album's current owners, as you mentioned, the art collective Pleaser, for allegedly copying the album and playing it online. There's the exhibit in Tasmania. And so what does all of this hype and who gets to hear it and how much people are paying for it mean for the actual value of the album? How is it going to sit in the, very kind of storied and incredible history of Wu-Tang's music?
Yeah, I think, kind of like I said earlier, that with it being so elusive, and it having a certain level of mystique, inherently there's value. And plus, how cool is it to say, I had to go to a museum to listen to an album and I can only hear 30 minutes of it and say that you're one of thousands of people in the entire world that's ever heard it. So, I mean, I think with Wu-Tang's, level of success, their level of, the sentimental relationship a lot of fans have with them, I think it's a win. I think it's definitely something that's super cool. I know me personally, as somebody who frequents art galleries and museums and things of that nature, having, being able to experience art there resonates a little differently. You know what I mean? It hits a little different to be able to check it out like that in public and stuff like that. So I definitely think that the way that this is being rolled out and being, exhibited to the public is, pretty cool. But also, if you can't get to Tasmania, I guess we're out of luck.
Yeah, too bad for us. Well, Jay, thank you so much for talking us through this. Hopefully I'm still alive in 2103 and get a chance to hear it. But I love the way that you sort of position this album and what it means for just the way that we think about scarcity in the music world.
For sure. Thank you. And hopefully I'll be alive to check it out as well.
Yeah. Fingers crossed for both of us. Jay Connor is a culture critic and senior editor at The Root. He joined us in LA very kindly at a very early hour. Wu-Tang's album Once Upon a Time in Shaolin is on display now at the Museum of Old and New Art in Tasmania.
I bomb atomically. Socrates' philosophies and hypotheses can't define how I be dropping these mockeries. Lyrically perform armed robbery, flee with the lottery. Possibly they spotted me. Battle scarred shogun, explosion when my pen hits. Tremendous, ultraviolet shine blind.
That's a bit of Wu-Tang Clan with Triumph. That's an off the album from way back in the day, 1997's Wu-Tang Forever.
And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime. And hey, while you're listening to the podcast, follow us. Check us out on YouTube and Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. Thanings for listening.
Swinging swords like Shinobi, stomp grounds and found footprints.